you don't understand something, just stop me. So yeah, my name is Daniel. I'm a DevOps engineer. Today I'm going to talk to you about automating Jenkins deployment and configuration with Docker, JCasC, Job DSL, and pipelines. I am the author of Building Enterprise JavaScript Applications. Is a quite lengthy book that goes through how to set up testing, CI/CD, and then deployment with Docker and Kubernetes, all around a JavaScript application. That was published in 2018. But this talk is actually based on something I wrote in the last 1 or 2 months. And it's 2 tutorials from DigitalOcean, which is how to automate Jenkins setup with Docker and Jenkins configuration as code, and how to automate Jenkins configuration using Job DSL. So if you are interested in what I'm going to be talking to you about today, then I have links to these 2 articles, which I'll share with Calvin, and he can share with you. These 2 articles would be the best way to take it forward, because I have to cover Docker, JCasC, Job DSL, and pipelines. So I can't really dive really deeply into each of these. So if you actually want to go through everything I'm talking about step by step, then these articles would be the best way to do it. Yeah, this one is quite lengthy. I printed it out one time and it's like 40-something pages. So yeah. Okay. So I don't know what everyone's experience of Jenkins or Docker is, so I'm just gonna cover everything, but be really quick on the simpler stuff. So what is Jenkins? Jenkins is an automation server. You can use it to run, automate running of any task. So you can run a cron job, for example, which are jobs that runs at a set interval. So you can, for example, like use Jenkins to run a job every week that use AWS SNS to send a SMS message to your parents to ask them how they are doing. But most of the time, people use Jenkins as a CI/CD server. So a typical scenario is that a developer pushes some new changes to a Git repository. If you use a platform like GitHub can send a webhook that notifies Jenkins that something has changed. Jenkins will take the notification and then pull in the Git repository and then run some kind of job that builds an artifact or deploy the code somewhere, maybe in a development environment for QA testers to test. So that's what Jenkins is, and that's what it's typically used for. But the problem I want to address today is that setting up Jenkins has traditionally been a manual process. So what does that involve? So it involves installing Java and a specific version of Java. And this can be an issue if you have something else running on your server that depends on a different version of Java. That if that happens, then you may have to run Jenkins on a different server, or you have to set the path differently for different programs. And both of them is a hassle, and both of them are not ideal. So after you install Java, you have to install the right packages, and installation differs on different platforms. So if you want to run Jenkins on macOS, then you have to use Brew. If you use Debian or Ubuntu, you use apt. And with like Debian, you have to like add in the right key. So it's not just a one-liner, and there's no clean and simple method to install Jenkins on every single operating system. And then after you've installed the Jenkins package, you have to configure it using the web user interface. I'll quickly go through that in a minute, but basically you have to click buttons and you got to type into input boxes and click more buttons. And this is a manual process, and humans are very slow and error prone. And even after you've set up Jenkins, configured it with the plugins, you have to add in the jobs. And if you are running a small shop with like 10 Jenkins shop, that may not be an issue. But in the larger companies that I've worked at, you're dealing with like hundreds of thousands of jobs. So obviously doing them manually is not practical. So let's just see what is involved in setting up, configuring Jenkins using the setup wizard. So once you've installed Java, you've installed the package and you're running Jenkins now, this is probably the first screen that you see. You've got to put in the administrative password, which is just a way for Jenkins to know that the person who's running this wizard has access to the server. And then we come to this screen where you have to install the plugins. And if you're running it on your local machine for development, for example, and you have a slow internet connection like me, then this might take like 5-10 minutes. And then you have to create a first admin user, and then you're ready to use Jenkins. So again, this is fine if you have to do it once, but if you have to do it many times, it gets boring really quickly. And it's not just a hassle for the person setting it up, it's also not scalable. So if you think about modern like kind of practices, like you might deploy Jenkins on Docker on Kubernetes, and you might configure like persistent storage to keep the state of the Jenkins server, but if you somehow lose that persistent storage, you don't really want to set up hundreds of thousands of jobs again. Yeah, and apart from it being a hassle, it's also not scalable. To teach someone how to set up a Jenkins server from scratch, it might take them a day if they've never used Jenkins before, or if someone who have done it like 2 years ago and they haven't done it since, it might take them like an hour or half an hour to get back on familiar with Jenkins. And then actually doing it is actually quite slow as well, especially downloading the plugins. It can take 5 to 10 minutes. And it's also not repeatable. It's not like the first time is 5 to 10 minutes and then the next time is 1 minute. It's 5 to 10 minutes every time. Again, it's not parallelizable. One person can only set up one server at a time. As much as we like to think we're good at multitasking, we're not. But I think the most important thing is that it's hard to document. Setting up a generic Jenkins server is easy, relatively, but setting it up for a specific company is quite hard. It's quite complex. It's not quite hard, but so if you have to document how to set up Jenkins for your company and you're doing it manually, you have to say, click add new item, put this in as the name, scroll down to this section, click on this drop box, and then select this option, and then copy this script from our repository and paste it into this box and press save. So if you are doing things manually, it's very hard to document. You can technically do this with like a tool called Selenium, but if you're going to go to that route, you might as well do it properly with JCasC and Job DSL. So what is JCasC and Job DSL and Docker? So this is all kind of part of, I won't say new, it's been around for like the last few years, but a relatively recent paradigm called everything as code. So the central idea is that we have applications and we write them as code. Because they're code, we can have tools that are built around that code that automate the documentation, the testing, the building, and the deployment of that code. So what if we don't just write applications as code? What if we apply that same idea to something else, like our infrastructure. What if we can define what servers and the network configurations between these servers as code? What if we don't have to manually SSH into a server and install dependencies? What if we can document those as code? So you may have been familiar with some of these tools. So infrastructure as code like Terraform and AWS CloudFormation. This allows you to set up like a whole, ECS like a ECS service on AWS. Set up the load balancers, set up the DNS settings in Route 53. You can set up buckets on AWS. You can set up GitHub repositories. So instead of going to the AWS console and clicking things manually, instead of going to the GitHub website and adding repositories manually, you define it as code and you run the Terraform tool or the CloudFormation tool. Similar thing with configuration as code. You have Ansible, Puppet, Chef are the most popular ones. Again, instead of going into the servers and installing dependencies, you define them as code and you tell Ansible to follow those instructions and set up your servers for you. And with Jenkins, there's something that I'll touch on later, which is pipeline as code. So instead of going to the Jenkins server and adding jobs manually, like freestyle jobs manually, defining the steps one by one, you define the steps in a file that's usually called Jenkins file, and you ask Jenkins to run a job based on that file. So we're going to carry that paradigm with us today, and we're going to set up our Jenkins server completely automatically using Docker Jenkins configuration as code, which is JCasC, Jenkins pipelines, and Jenkins Job DSL. So the goal at the end of this presentation is we will have a setup where to set up Jenkins with all the jobs that we want, we don't have to click a single button. We just have to run a single command on the command line. So how do we do that? So we get started with Docker, which is like the easiest win we can have. So for those of us who are not familiar with Docker, what is Docker? Docker is a virtualization tool similar to virtual machines, but it's much more lightweight. It's much more lightweight because virtual machines is based off of a hypervisor, and then you run an operating system on top of the hypervisor. So basically a process inside a virtual machine is running on top of a virtual operating system, on top of a hypervisor, on top of your host operating system. With a container, the virtualization is achieved using C groups and namespaces. And so a process that runs as a container is just another process on your host operating system. So that's much more efficient. It's cross-platform, which means when the Docker image can be run anywhere that Docker is installed. It doesn't matter if it's Windows or macOS or Linux. As long as you have Docker installed, that Docker image will run. It's isolated. It can be isolated, but if you misuse it, then you can break the isolation. But generally, it's isolated, which means if something bad happens in your container, you can contain it and it wouldn't affect your host operating system and it wouldn't affect other containers running on the system. It's also it can also be self-contained. So you can install all the dependencies inside the Docker image. And when you deploy the Docker image, it doesn't need anything else. So you'll see later on, I'm going to install the Jenkins plugins that I'm going to use inside the Docker image itself. So even if I want to run that Jenkins instance without any internet connection, it will still run because all the plugins are already installed. Same with Java. I could run a container and then install Java by by SSHing into the container, but if I have all my dependencies pre-installed beforehand, then it becomes a self-contained application. You can run it just as if you were running like your Chrome browser with one line. So basically, if you're new to Docker, Docker is a tool that allows you to package everything your application needs plus the application itself into a nice package, and it allows you to run it across many platforms. So instead of going to a server, installing Java, installing the packages in the right way for that operating system, we could just use Docker to run Jenkins. And Jenkins is available on Docker Hub as the Jenkins image. And so all we really need to do is to do Docker run and then specify the image to run. So I can show that here. So if I don't know anything about Java, I don't know anything about maybe even Ubuntu or like apt. If I know how to run this command, I can run Jenkins. So it takes about half a minute for it to start. It gives you this secret, which is how you prove to the setup wizard that you have control of the server. So I just put that in here, and it asks me to, this is a setup wizard. I can use it to install plugins, but if I do, I'll probably crash my internet connection, and then you won't be able to hear me anymore. But I'll just click it. You can see it starting. I have a slow internet connection, so all this probably takes like a minute or two to install. So I'm just gonna stop it right here. But that simple demonstration has showed you that with a simple Docker command, you can skip the installation and configuration steps of the server environment itself just by running the Docker image. So that was an easy win. For us to fully automate the Jenkins deployment and configuration, next thing we should do is to configure Jenkins, which is basically what that setup wizard was set up to do, the one I showed you before. But if we don't want to click buttons and type in usernames and passwords, we have to replace that with another solution, and that solution is JCasC. Yeah, this is the meme I made. Yeah, when we run Jenkins, the first screen we see, we shouldn't want to see unlock Jenkins. We should be able to see the Jenkins dashboard that most of us are familiar with. So let's see how JCasC can help us to do that. So first of all, if we're going to use JCasC to configure our Jenkins instance, first of all, we should remove the setup wizard. And Jenkins provides us a way of doing that. We just pass in this option, run setup wizard equals false. We can pass that in as the JavaOps environment variable. So if you run a Jenkins instance, any instance with this in JavaOps environment variable set to this value, then the setup wizard would not show up. So how do we add that to the image? And again, I don't know how familiar with Docker, so I assume you guys, I'll start from scratch. So to understand how to modify our Docker image, we have to understand how the image is built. And the Docker image is built from a Docker file, which is simply a list of instructions. So if you look into the source code of Jenkins image, you will see something like this. I've truncated it because it was too long, but basically it's based off another image called OpenJDK, which is how Java is installed. And then on top of that, it's installing other tools like Git and curl. It's creating a Jenkins home directory to host scripts like install plugins, which we'll see how to use it later. but basically it's a list of instructions that is pre-run, and then the results is saved into an image. So because in this Docker file, Git and curl is already installed, in the final Jenkins image, I don't have to install it again. So if this is how the Jenkins image is built, what we can do to set our JavaOps environment variable is we can write our own Docker file and build our own image. And we don't have to do all this stuff from scratch. We can just base it off the Jenkins image that we were running. So if we create a new Docker file using Jenkins as the base image, and then using the env instruction, this is Docker file specific, to set the JavaOps environment variable, and we build a new image using this Docker file and we run it, then we should be able to see a Jenkins server that does not show the setup wizard. So let's try that. This is something I prepared earlier. So I'm building again, and I will run it again. So the server is down because it's still booting up. So now it's starting all the plugins. Once we see this line, Jenkins is fully up and running, then we can go back to here, and we can see that the setup wizard doesn't show up anymore. But what you might have also noticed is that on the top right corner, we have 2 notifications, and it's telling us that Jenkins is not set up properly. The Jenkins URL is not set up properly, and Jenkins is unsecure. So this is expected because we didn't really set anything up. We just disabled the setup wizard. So yeah, for the next few minutes, we're going to show you how to use JCasC to set it up again so that Jenkins doesn't complain anymore. So we're going to use configuration as code, this plugin, to set up our Jenkins server. So Jenkins is built using a pluggable architecture. So most of the features that you've been kind of familiar with, like even pulling in from GitHub, those are provided by plugins. So JCasC is no different. JCasC relies on the configuration as code plugin. On our server, we can just go to like manage Jenkins and then install the plugins from the web user interface. But again, we don't want to do that because we don't want to click anything. So what we can do is use a script that is baked into the Jenkins image, which is install plugins.sh. And the way that works is if we provide it with a list of plugins like ant, build timeout, cloudbeat folder, the install plugins script is gonna go through it like a shopping list and basically install them one by one. So the way we're gonna do this is we're gonna copy the list of plugins into the Docker image itself, and then we're gonna add an extra instruction to tell Docker to run the script, passing in the list. So let's try that. Oh, yeah. I should have showed you that there was no plugins installed here, but you just have to trust me for now. So build it again, and now we're running again.
Daniel, can I see the file, plugins file?
Yeah.
The test file, the content.
Yeah. So this is the list. There's actually I think it was 18 to 20. I forgot of plugins which are the recommended plugins. I've added 2 so that I don't have to rebuild it later, which is the Job DSL plugin, the configuration as code plugin. So if you take these 2 plugins out, the rest is just the list of recommended plugins that you would have used if you used the wizard.
Where can I check the key? I saw the Mailer latest or
Right.
LDAP. Where can I find the key?
Yeah, good question. So if you just type in like Jenkins plugin, let's search for like configuration as code. So you have like the normal name, but you on the link you also have like the actual ID. So this is the name you should use.
Okay. Yes.
Yeah. So some of like the pipeline ones, the name doesn't really reflect the like human friendly name. So like this one, like pipeline declarative is pipeline model definition. So yeah, you should really go by the one in the URL. And you can also specify the version. Latest is just a convenient way to get the latest one. But I would recommend against using latest just because the way Docker builds the image. So if your plugins.txt doesn't change, like the actual, characters in the file doesn't change, then Docker will assume that nothing has changed and it will use the cache version. So if between now and like the next time you're building the image, if like a new version of Git actually comes out, you building the image wouldn't actually get the latest Git plugin because it will think it's still valid. So I'm only doing this for demonstration purposes. In like the actual work that I do for my clients, I specify each version individually. Yeah. So, okay, now it's up and running. We have, I think I skipped a step. Well, did I skip a step? Doesn't matter. I think I actually did skip a step. But anyways, if we refresh now, we can see that if we refresh the page, that we have plugins that is installed, and you can see the ones we specified, like configuration as code plugin is installed, Job DSL is installed, which we'll use later. So we've kind of already replicated one of the steps in the setup wizard, which is installing plugins. But you can still see like on the top right, yeah, this is because I skipped a step, but if you remember, it was complaining that Jenkins was not, the Jenkins URL was not set up properly. So to fix that, we can, because we have actually installed the JCasC plugin, the configuration as code plugin, we can actually now use it to set Jenkins up. Let me just go the old one so you can see what I was talking about. So to use JCasC, you have to use you have to specify the configuration as a YAML file. So instead of specifying like a user named admin, you would have to specify that user and the password in this YAML file. Instead of setting up permissions, like to tell like authenticated users can read all the jobs and admin users can do everything. Instead of doing that on the web UI, you do that in the YAML file. But the syntax for the YAML file is actually very hard to decipher. Like this is the documentation for it. You can go into your Jenkins server. If you have the configuration as code plugin installed, you can go to this URL, configuration as code/reference, and you can see what kind of properties are available for you to use in the YAML file. And it's not a user-friendly document, but once you do get used to it, we can, for example, look for the property location, which will show you how to set up the Jenkins URL. So if we use where is it? If we use unclassified location URL, if we use that key, we can set up the HTTP address of the Jenkins installation, which is another word for Jenkins URL. Yeah, so sorry for the confusion, but this is the what I wanted to show you before. We've disabled the setup wizard, we've installed the plugins, but it's complaining that URL is empty. And I've just said that if we use this JCasC file and pass it in to our plugin, then it can set up the Jenkins URL for us. So the way we do this is similar to how we did with the plugins. We copy the file, the JCasC file, this 3-liner, into the Docker image, and we're using another environment variable called cast Jenkins config, and we're setting it to the location of the file copied in. So when we run this, image, the JCasC plugin is going to read this environment variable, read our YAML file, and it's going to follow the instructions, just like if you were following instructions to build a Lego. So let's try that. This is what I showed you before, but I'll show it again. So without the JCasC file, is complaining that Jenkins URL is empty. We have a question from Donald, which is if we put the latest, if we put the word latest in the plugins.txt when it scales out and take the latest version of the library, how do we ensure that the versions are aligned across the farm? So if I understand your question correctly, when you scale out, right, you're scaling out from the same image. So these plugins are installed when you build an image, and then if you scale out, let's say you start with 10 servers, now you're hundreds of servers, you're still running the same image, so the plugins versions will still be the same across all your servers. And if you want to update the version of your application across your whole cluster, then you will have to build a new image again. Does that answer your question? You can message me again if it doesn't. But I think now we're ready. So we've passed in the JCasC file. We've asked the plugin to read it. And now if we refresh, we should see that the notification no longer exists. And we can also check by going to Manage Jenkins, Configure System, and scroll down. Yeah, if we scroll down, then you can see that Jenkins URL is set properly.
So that even these local hosts, we need to set the 127.0.1.
Yeah, so I should probably have told you what Jenkins URL is. Like Jenkins URL is a way for us to tell Jenkins how it should refer to itself. So I can use 127.0.01. I can use localhost, right? I can use like 127.2.3.2 something, right? But if let's say it wants to send an email or something, if I just use 127.0.0.1, someone from outside cannot reach it. Maybe I have an ngrok server that exposes this instance to the outside world. I need to tell Jenkins, like, if you're going to send an email, if you're going to send a message to someone, how those people should refer to this Jenkins server. I think if you do it like this, sometimes it complains if you're using a different DNS name than the one that you set for the Jenkins URL. But that's basically what it is. Yeah. So now we've used JCasC, those 3 lines of JCasC to set up the Jenkins URL. It's still complaining that it's not secure, and that's probably because right now everyone can do anything. I didn't have to log in or anything, right? I can create a job. I can like run jobs without logging in. So that's obviously not secure. And I don't want to bore you guys with like all the boring references, which is all in this document. So I'm just gonna go through what configuration you need to set up Jenkins as if it was set up by the setup wizard. So first we had to create an admin user, and we can replicate that with JCasC by going to Jenkins, security rem, local, users, and then create a list of users. And we don't want to hard code the username and password indirectly. So here I'm putting in putting like a variable name inside this squiggly bracket, and I can replace that later when I'm running the container. And then we have this authorization strategy, global matrix permissions. Again, don't ask me how they named it. I don't know. That's not the name I would have chosen. But this basically give permissions for anyone who have logged in to read the jobs, and for the administrator to do everything. And then we have this remoting security, which is to do with when you run Jenkins as a distributed system, this setting allows you to configure permissions for whether an agent, whether the controller can trust the agent, and vice versa. You really just set this to true, and you only really need it if you're running a distributed Jenkins setup. And then lastly, we have security queue item authenticator, blah, blah, blah. This one allows you to run jobs as the person who have logged into the Jenkins server, because by default, it runs as a Jenkins system server, which is insecure. You really don't really need to know all this stuff. If you just want to replicate what the setup wizard does, then you can use this template as the base of your JCasC file. So if we use this file and we build a new Docker image, this one was 3, we're going to use 4. Yeah. Yeah, if we build it using a new JCasC file, we should see the notifications disappear, except this one. This probably came out today because I updated my Jenkins version like before the talk, like 2 hours before, but I guess they push a new version. Yeah, but apart from this one, all the other notifications should disappear. Yep, so Jenkins is fully up and running, so we can check now. So now it asks me for my username because I have specified security RAM local users. So now I have to use admin and, oh wait. So now, because I tried to run the Jenkins server using the old command, but remember I said I passed in these variables which I have to fill in at runtime. So I forgot to do that, and that's why I can't log in. So if I run it, so I can pass in those environment variables, those variables by using this flag, Jenkins admin equals admin, and then I set the password to password. If I run Jenkins this way, then I can use those passwords here. Jenkins is up and running, so let's refresh it. And if I put in admin password, I am now logged in. And the only notification I get left is that a newer version is available. So with this JCasC file and this Docker file, we have basically replicated everything that the setup wizard did for us using these two files. So typically this will be the end of it, but I promise you guys more in the agenda. So right now we have set up Jenkins, but we have no jobs in the Jenkins server. So how do we add jobs without clicking buttons? We can always go to like new items and then do a test job and then press OK. And then, I don't know, add a new build step, add some parameters. But yeah, this is very clunky. So the way we add jobs is to use another plugin. So just like the configuration as code plugin allows to configure Jenkins, the server itself, the Job DSL plugin allows us to configure jobs inside Jenkins. So with JCasC, you have to use this YAML syntax. With Job DSL, you have to use a Groovy syntax. And although the syntax is slightly better, I guess, at least the documentation is slightly better than this thing, it's still not super easy to navigate around, just like the rest of Jenkins, to be honest. But if you go to Jenkins ci.github.io/jobdsl plugin, you can see the methods you can add into your Groovy script. So this script defines a freestyle job that has a single step, which simply prints hello world into the console output, right? So how do we find that in the documentation? So we have job, steps, and shell. So if we look on the right-hand side, we can see that there's a job property drop method. If you scroll down, it's the steps method, and then we have the shell. So this is exactly like the syntax that I've used in my presentation, like step, shell, echo, hello world. But if you want to do something else, there are like, you basically have to know where to look. But yeah, for our simple demonstration, we're just going to use job, steps, and shell. And by default, this documentation shows you all the methods that is available from all the plugins that Job DSL supports. But if you want to see like just which properties and methods are supported just by the plugins that you have installed, you can double click on this checkbox, and you can see from the right that the list of methods that is available has decreased dramatically, right? So if we deselected all the plugins, then these are all the methods that is available with a bare bones Jenkins installation. So yeah, we still have the steps and shell because that's pretty basic, but later on I'll show you how to use a pipeline to define your job, and that's not available here right now. But if we reselect all the plugins, you can see that we have a thing called pipeline job. So this is how you navigate around the documentation. But for now, we just need job, we just need steps and shell to run our echo hello world. So how do we add this script into our Docker file, Docker image? Again, it's the same thing as we did before. We just copy it into our Docker image, and instead of using an environment variable, because we actually have JCasC installed, we can add an extra field to our JCasC YAML file called jobs. Again, this is documented here somewhere. Probably take you a while to find it. But if you add in a jobs field with a list item, a file pointing to where you copied the Groovy file, it will find it and it will set up the jobs for you. So let's try that. There's also a way to set this up manually. But if you're interested in doing that manually, I would refer you to the article that I wrote. That goes through this process manually because the article didn't assume people understood what JCasC is. Yeah, so just to be clear, Job DSL and JCasC are two different plugins. You can use them independently, but the real power is if you use them and integrate them together. Yep, so now Jenkins is up and running. Ask me for my login again because I brought the server down and brought it back up again. But now when I sign in, you can see that the demo job that I specified with the Groovy script is automatically appeared on my screen. And if I look into configure, you can see that it's like equivalent to adding a build step and execute shell and pasting in echo hello world. And just to prove that it works, if we press on build now, on the output console, we can see echo hello world here. So now we have, with Docker, JCasC, and Job DSL, been able to set up our Jenkins server, configured it, as well as defined a job. If you replicate this multiple times, you can define as many jobs as you want, right? And it will set it up for you all the same. So we can also end it here, but nobody believes in freestyle jobs anymore because everyone is now using pipeline jobs. So in the last piece of the puzzle, I'm gonna show you how to set up Jenkins jobs that is based on a pipeline file, like a Jenkins file, instead of freestyle jobs. And the benefit of using a Jenkins file is that you can version control it alongside your source code. So let's say we didn't have a pipeline file, if I change the way that my application runs tests and builds, then I would have to update the code, push it to application's code repository, but I also have to come back to my Job DSL file and change the instructions of how to build and deploy, right? And then I will have to redeploy Jenkins just for that one change to that one application, right? So obviously that's not scalable, and you really want the way how you document your tests and your builds to be alongside your application itself. So that's one of the major benefits of using a Jenkins pipeline file instead of either manually configuring jobs with the web UI or using Job DSL on its own. So I'm not going to write my own pipeline file. I'm just going to use one that's from the Jenkins CI pipeline examples repository. So Jenkins have this repository that have like examples for people who don't know how to write pipeline syntax. So it has like a lot of examples of how to use environments, how to use parameters, and I just picked this random one just because it's simple. It basically sets up an environment variable called through, set it to pipeline, and then it has like stages and steps, and it prints the environment variables out. So that's the one I'm going to use. And it's pretty similar to the job method. The only difference is that it's a pipeline job method, and instead of specifying the steps here, I'm specifying the destination of where to find this file. So I'm saying you can find it on GitHub in the Jenkins CI pipeline examples repository. And this you can find here. Let's have a look. So if we look at pipeline job, what is it again? CPS CSM. Definition, sorry. Definition, CPS CSM, CSM, Git, remote, GitHub. Yeah, so again, it's not the easiest documentation to navigate, but once you get used to it, it gets easier. So we specify where to find the repo and then also where to find the Jenkins pipeline script. So if we, this is the last step now, if we update our Groovy file with this new syntax, and we build the Docker file again, Docker image again, you can see now that we have two jobs. We have the demo job as we had before. Let's run it again just so that we know it still works. Yep, it's still echoing hello world. And let's try the GitHub demo. You can see from the output that it has successfully pulled in the Jenkins CI pipeline examples repository. It's not going to look for the script, the pipeline script, and now it's read it, and now it's executing it, and it's printing out the environment variables as expected. So I've pretty much covered everything. As you can see, can you hear someone?
頭先食咗半碗係咪啊？半碗嚟嘅嗰度。而家未，好少啫。頭先我半碗。呢條有半碗啊，我識俾大半碗食啦。跟住執大半碗又。夠唔夠啊？係咪啊
？Yeah, I can.
係差唔多，好多啦，夠啦，夠曬啦。頭先冇呢度咁多。
I have a question about DSL file. If we manually use a GUI to set up a script, and then cannot export the GUI file from the Jenkins, and then have a modification or further modification. They are just for modification.
Yeah. All right. There we go. Okay. So I think the question from Calvin was how to, if you set it up using the GUI, how can you kind of migrate to using JCasC and Job DSL?
So, I want to import the something some pipeline or some freestyle script into the Jenkins, and then have some modification, and then I want to export it and review our script. Is that can I do it?
Yeah, so you can do that with JCasC. So if you can add a new job, and then you can go to Manage Jenkins, go to Configuration as Code, and then you can view the configuration. So if you just copy this whole thing and paste it in your jcasc.yaml, it will replicate most of the things that you have set up manually through the with the GUI. What it doesn't do is it doesn't set up the jobs. So Yeah, so if you set up hundreds of jobs with Jenkins, you would have to redefine them each one with Job DSL. But for the JCasC part, for the configuring the server part, the Jenkins server part, you can use this field configuration and copy and paste it. So yep, so I've showed you how to automate setting up Jenkins without clicking a single button using Docker, JCasC, and Job DSL, and that really is it. And I'll leave you with one meme that I made, which is Pepperidge Farm. So yep, that's the end. So if anyone got any more questions?
Seems not too much reason to use another paid service for the pipeline after you show this demo. like Circle CI, Travis CI. you because you already automate this manual duty and also show the some hacking or some shortcut for us for learning Jenkins.
Yeah.
Does anyone have? Yeah.
I wouldn't say Jenkins is like the most user-friendly thing. So unlike, managing a Jenkins server is not like plugins keep getting updated. Like even though I updated Jenkins server today, like there's a new version available. If you look into the Jenkins image, there's actually a lot of vulnerabilities. So I wouldn't say like just because of JCasC and Job DSL and Docker that you can just use Jenkins instead of like paid platforms like Circle CI. But for those of us who do have to use Jenkins, then I guess it makes it easier. But I manage Jenkins for like my clients, and basically I have to update it every week. And sometimes like the plugins are quite hard to manage. Especially if I use latest, which is why I don't use it anymore. Like the plugins becomes outdated and it's incompatible with the newer version of Jenkins. So if you update your Jenkins version, you have to basically, go through each plugin to make sure that they're compatible with each other. It's basically a nightmare. So, yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
This is not a silver bullet that solves everything, but yeah, it helps.
Does any question from the audience?
Oh yes, may I ask questions?
Yep.
Sorry, my earphone is just now one of battery and this is auto unmuted. sorry about that.
It's okay.
Currently, I'm using a Jenkins in my company, and the Jenkins has set up a lot of configurations such as the SVN's connection and the Maven connection in the Jenkins. I would like to know if the config as code can export those configuration and document in the cell file.
So I showed Calvin how you can export the configuration by going to manage Jenkins and then configuration as code and then field configuration. So the amount of configuration that it can export using this method is limited by the plugin itself. So the way configuration as code works is it has to integrate with other plugins. So if I didn't have the Job DSL plugins installed, I couldn't specify this job's property in the YAML file. So if you have some integration with like SVN, then it's probably done through an SVN related plugin, right? So whether you can export that function into a YAML file depends on whether the configuration as code plugin has an integration with that plugin. And if it doesn't, then one, you cannot export it, and two, you cannot set it up even from JCasC. But JCasC has pretty good support for most of the popular ones. So unless you're doing something like really outdated or really niche, then it should support it.
Oh, okay, thank you.
And the other one? Yeah, so if no question or further question, you may post in our discussion forum. I mean, in Facebook, we have a discussion group for open source Hong Kong. So you may paste the question and then for further follow up. And also, Daniel has shared the slide to me. I will share after the show, and the video should be posted on the YouTube for you as a reference, because you may see some demo is a short code, so that you can review the YouTube video as a reference for you learning code, infrastructure as code or JCasC file. Yeah. So thank you, Daniel, so much today for amazing demo and sort out some practical issue on DevOps side. So
yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah. Okay. See you everyone. If you have a question to us or Daniel, you may leave it discuss privately. It's okay. Yeah. So okay. Thank you very much. I will stop the video.
All right.
So recording. Yeah.
Bye.
Bye bye.